This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. And is Trump getting back to the winning political strategy, and translating that into policy, that he used during the campaign with his rollout yesterday of a substantial immigration reform policy as it pertains to legal immigration to this country? It's the intersection of immigration and border security and jobs and wage growth, which was a dominant portion of his political campaign. So is he recognizing that a lot of what he has done in the first 6 months, and his poll numbers tell the story, has been far afield from what he was focused on as a presidential candidate? For an answer to that question and many others, we're pleased to be joined by Doug Wead, who is a presidential historian. He's also a New York Times best-selling author. He has worked on, I believe, 10 presidential campaigns, so he has been around this Game of Thorns.
Oh, I see it
as
there.
he calls it.
Game of Thrones, Game of Thorns.
The Game of Thorns is the book. Boy, well timed, too, with season 7. Game of Thorns, the inside story of Hillary Clinton's failed campaign and Donald Trump's winning strategy. We're pleased to be joined by Doug Wead from House Targaryen. Doug, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan and Amy. Great to be with you. I love Chicago.
Oh, well,
like I'm there talking to you.
Well, it's great to have you. And so, what of that? The book, the thesis of the book is essentially explaining why Trump won and Hillary lost. Well, what is the answer to that question, and what does it provide in terms of direction for the president of the United States now, as we sit here in August?
Well, there are so many reasons. Draining the swamp was a big one. I think the American public just had an instinct for what they felt was corruption. They don't. All of us don't understand how the Import-Export Bank works, or the Federal Reserve works, or what was really in the stimulus bill. But we know we lost the value of our houses. We know our 401ks were in the tank. There was just an innate sense that something's wrong. Hillary had Wall Street. She had academia. She had Hollywood. She had everything going for her. She had the largest super PAC in American history. Spent it all. Had a ground game of 960,000 volunteers. And yet, in spite of it all, the American people went with Trump.
Well, when was the shadowy figure of defeat looming over Hillary Clinton's campaign? Like, when did they realize, we might be in trouble here?
Well, towards the end, but not completely, because even after it was over, even now, there's denial. I think the realization, the emphasis on Russia, it was what was in those emails that were exposed that no one's discussing that had their impact. The idea of co-opting the Catholic Church and changing its doctrines for political purposes, openly discussed. That was never discussed on television, but those emails were spread from bishop to bishop across the country. The ridicule of evangelical Christians, the Hollywood celebrities all getting together the night before the vote and producing a videotape that used profanity. Just imagine for a second if a campaign did that and used the name Muhammad with profanity, kind of reaction you'd get. But they did that targeting evangelical Christians. So, 1% of America is Muslim, 70% are Christian. There were just a lot of pretty glaring mistakes. Bill Clinton campaigned inside the Hillary Clinton campaign to get her to make an appeal to Catholics and to apologize for those emails. She was afraid it would only call more attention to it. Obama called up to Brooklyn and tried to get them to reach out to evangelicals, which are 26% of the vote is white evangelical vote, and they wouldn't do it.
Well, so beyond relitigating and explaining the implications of the choices that were made by both sides in the campaign, what are some takeaways from the success that Trump had as a candidate that could be applied or at present to help Trump be more successful as a president?
Well, he seems to be relentless, like a dog with a bone, toward his campaign promises. His whole purpose now seems to be, regardless of what the polls say now, he wants to be a president that would be able to say, I did what I said I would do, read my lips, no new taxes, and then raise the taxes. He wants to avoid that. So he's making that effort. Branding, he will always invoke that. He did it successfully during the campaign. There's a little bit of crazy like a fox going on here. The trip to the Mideast was a shock to many people. One day speaking in Saudi Arabia, the next day in Israel, and it was just a flawless trip, and that surprised many people. I guess that was a Jared Kushner production. So the economy, the turnaround of the economy has got to be pleasing to him. Jobs, the investment coming into America, it's pretty striking. He has about a $4 billion edge over the first 100 days of Obama, to give you a point of comparison.
Wow.
Yeah,
$4 billion?
Well, I understand, but where do we find him 8 months in? Not in a very strong position politically, with no signature policy achievement. I mean, Neil Gorsuch, yes. There are other achievements, the Keystone Pipeline and so forth. But in terms of those big ticket promises that you're mentioning and that he's talked a lot about in the first 8 months when he hasn't been talking about Russian collusion or other nonsense, is Obamacare replace, tax reform, and then now, which he started to get to yesterday, border security. So what's happened to Trump, the candidate, draining the swamp, in theory, to Trump, the president, having the swamp drain him of political capital in the first 8 months?
Well, I think that you're right. He's not completely satisfied, but you mentioned the Gorsuch thing. That's no small task. George H.W. Bush was credited for appointing two to the Supreme Court a year in. But the first one was Souter, who actually voted contrary to what George H.W. Bush wanted. So it was like a giveaway. So it's no small task that he's achieved that, because that's what his base wanted. Then there's the economy is no small thing, because that's basically what he was running on. And the numbers show great satisfaction there. This policy of eliminating two regulations for each new one, the creating of more competition. I mean, here was Boeing right after Trump was elected. They said, okay, where's our $10 billion? That's what it cost to launch the USS Gerald Ford, this great aircraft carrier. They wanted $10 billion for their new Air Force One, and they had given $2 million to the Clinton Foundation. They'd maxed out their donations to Clinton on the executive level, and Trump was saying, hey, no, you want government money, come in with a reasonable bid and that works, and you can have it. Now there are 4 companies competing with Boeing. This increases the number of jobs. It ends some of the corruption. So the process of draining the swamp has certainly begun. And as far as immigration goes, he is the wall. The numbers have dropped like a rock. And this effort to go after MS-13 has kind of turned around some of the discussion on immigration. So his base, if you look at the polling, his base is pretty satisfied with him. And that seems to be what he wants, is to reassure that base, you elected me, here's what I'm doing for you.
Yeah, but if to speak about, polling numbers, the Quinnipiac University latest polling, Trump's approval ratings plunges to a new low of 33% approval rating. And it also said that American voters say 54 to 26% that they're embarrassed rather than proud to have him as president. Those are some pretty shocking numbers.
Yeah, he's a controversial character. Yeah, those are low numbers. They're not historic low numbers. Other presidents have dropped into those low numbers during their first year.
Well, do you think if he stopped tweeting, it would help?
I think so. Certainly some of the tweets, but that's part of his thing, is to go directly to the American people. And there's no question that he's a very interesting and controversial figure. What's fascinating to me is the American people knew that when they selected him, but they were just so frustrated with one company gets $100 million interest-free money from the Federal Reserve, and its competitor has to move out of the country. One company is exempted by the Obama stimulus program from meeting all environmental regulations, and another company has to keep them and ends up moving to Mexico to avoid it. They're just tired of the corruption, and what they've seen is the value of their houses increase. That's what hits home. That some people can now sell their house for the first time in years, and the 401ks that the elderly depend on are beginning to show some strength. So I think that's why he's maintaining a solid but small base of support among those who elected him.
All right. He is Doug Wead, presidential historian and the author of the new book, Game of Thorns, the inside story of Hillary Clinton's failed campaign and Donald Trump's winning strategy. Doug, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.